Welcome to your lesson on how to peer review. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the tools that you'll use. What you see here is a copy of the peer review guide. This is linked into the Lesson 5 folder if you need another copy or need to print it, but you can get this piece of paper from me before you start your peer review. So first I want to just talk about what is on this paper and how it's used. The first thing you're going to do is write your name, because this is the piece that you will hold on to. This is for you. Then you're going to write the title of your writing piece. Do those two things first. If you look at the columns, you'll see that each column has a different purpose. The first column is for you to evaluate yourself, for you to review your own writing by yourself. The second column is for another student in our class to look over your writing and leave comments. The third column is for a second student in our class to look over your writing and read columns, or look over your writing and make comments in the columns. Lesson 5 is when you'll do your first review. You'll do your second review after Lesson 6. So you'll make some revisions before you do your second review. And finally, the last column is for me. I'll be reviewing your paper, and this is how you'll see your progression of how your writing has changed over time, and also your final grade. The comment section is the place for you or to leave comments that are specific and constructive and helpful for your partner when you review their paper, and for them when they review your paper. Okay? You're going to use kind of a 4-point scale, and I'll zoom in on this. Okay, so the way that you are going to grade your peer is by using this scale here. So the best score that you can get is an M for mastery. Think of that like a 4. It says mastery, you've got it. The next criteria is an AM, which stands for almost mastered or approaching mastery. You're close, but you've still got some work to do. So this is when a student, say you're going over cups, capitals, usage, punctuation, and spelling. If they have 1 or 2 or 3 mistakes, you're going to give them an AM. If they have no mistakes, then they've mastered capitalization, usage, punctuation, and spelling. Next, you have a DM, which stands for developing mastery. Think of this like a 2. You're going to use the letter marks, but the numbers are just for a way for you to think about it. So you're going to be writing the letters on the paper. So the DM is if your partner is developing mastery. For example, sentences are correct and vary in length. Maybe they have some 5th grade sentences, but not quite enough for you to say that they've mastered it or that they're almost there. And finally, beginning mastery, BM, you can think of this as like a 1. It means you've just started and you've got a lot more learning to do. So if you've got very far to go, you're a little ways from making mastery, you've got some more practice, then a BM would be what you would give someone in that situation. And I'll talk more about some examples of various aspects of your writing as we continue. So that's the grading scale right here at the bottom. And again, think of the mastery as a 4, almost mastery as a 3, developing mastery as a 2, and beginning mastery as a 1. And remember that when you put scores or grades into these boxes, when you peer review, you're going to use the letters. Okay, let's look at the actual document. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to be looking at in your partner's paper is audience and purpose. You're going to be looking for 2 things. You're not going to write in the gray boxes at all. The gray box is the title box, so you're not going to write anything there. You're just going to be writing in the white boxes. So for the first white box, Establish and maintain an audience. This means that you have the same audience, the same sort of speech throughout your writing. If I were writing a letter to my mom, I need to make sure that I keep addressing my mom. I don't bring in any other audience members into what I'm writing about. Next, establishes and maintains a specific purpose. So you have 3 options for purposes. You've already identified your purpose at this point in your writing. One option is to tell a narrative. That's to tell a story. No one for informative writing it has that as a purpose. The other 2 purposes are to persuade, to make someone think a certain way, or to persuade them to take action, to do something. And then the other purpose is inform, just to tell someone about a topic that you know about, to educate. So think about what your purpose is and make sure that you stick with that purpose throughout. If you pick an informative purpose, make sure that you're not trying to persuade your reader to do anything. If you're writing a persuasive piece, then in your conclusion, which you'll talk about in the last lesson, you need to have a call for action. You need to ask them to do something if they are persuaded. So make sure that whichever you've chosen, either to inform or persuade, you stick with that purpose throughout the writing. If you're writing to inform, you shouldn't be asking anyone to think or do anything. If you're writing to persuade, you should have those things because your purpose is to persuade someone to do something or think a certain way. The next piece is idea development. Idea development is a big square. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. So idea development is all about the content, the actual writing. So does this person use appropriate and effective paragraphs? Do they have examples, facts, and explanations and descriptions? This one is probably the one that's going to take you a little bit to grade them on because there are a lot of things in this box. So using appropriate and effective paragraphs. Do they have paragraphs? If there are no paragraphs present, this person is beginning mastery. They are far from the target if they have no paragraphs yet. If they have some paragraphs, but they're too short, less than 3 sentences, or they're too long, maybe it's one big paragraph, then that would be someone who is developing mastery. There are paragraphs present, but they're too long or they're too short, there's not enough information there. If the person that you're grading, if they do have paragraphs, they are of appropriate length, but they're lacking descriptions or quotes or examples, then you would give that person an AM for approaching mastery or almost mastered. They've got paragraphs of the right length, but they don't have enough descriptions. And finally, if someone has mastered idea development, they're going to have a paragraph for each subject. Their paragraphs are going to be focused. They're going to be between 5 and 8 sentences, not too short and not too long, and they'll have plenty of examples, descriptions, descriptive wording, explanations, and possibly quotes. And then finally, stays on topic. Make sure that in one paragraph, it's about one thing. If someone is writing an informative piece about basketball and a paragraph is about equipment and players, that's not focused. Each paragraph should have one topic or one subtopic. Stick to one focused idea. The next thing we're going to talk about is structure. Okay. When talking about structure, we're really talking about how the paper is organized. First, is the form correct? And what this means is if you chose to write a letter, is it formatted like a letter? Do you have the date in the top right corner? Did you skip a line for your salutation when you said, "Dear whomever your audience is"? Do you have paragraphs? Do you have a sincerely your name at the bottom formatted in the correct place? You can use our letter templates that we use for our Friday letter to help you check to see if a letter is formatted correctly. In an article, you're looking for text features. Now, if this is your very first peer revision and someone chose an article, they might not have text features yet because that's a few lessons ahead. in our first peer review, we're really focusing on content. But the time when the article form is going to come into play very heavily is in the second peer review, after an article writer has had a chance to watch the video on adding text features and had time to make those revisions and add those text features. But if you are grading an article, then you're looking for text features that you would see in Scholastic News or that you would see in a newspaper. You're looking for things like pictures with captions. You're looking for timelines. You're looking for graphs. You're looking for charts. The first thing you have to do is make sure that those things are present, and the second thing you have to do is make sure that they have a purpose. Does the graph explain something to the reader? Does it make the text clearer? Does the picture show something that's related to what the picture or to what the paragraph is about? Does the timeline help a reader understand chronological events? So in addition to the text features being present, they also have to make sure the text features make sense and add to the learning and understanding of the reader. Next, the writing is organized logically. The paragraphs are in order and make sense. If you're writing about the creation of Gatorade, for example, you wouldn't start at today and talk about today's flavors and then backtrack. Make sure that when you're organizing your paragraphs and you're putting them in order, that the order makes sense. One thing that strong writers often do is put their strongest paragraph first or last, to start the writing strong or to end it strong. So think about that when you're organizing your paragraphs and your structure for your writing. And then finally, sentences are correct and they vary in length. This means that sentences don't all start the same way. One thing you can learn about Gatorade is. One thing you can also learn about Gatorade is. So make sure that your sentences have some variation, and that's one thing that I'll be conferring with students about on this next check-in point, is thinking about ways to restructure your sentences so they're a little bit more interesting for the reader. Next is writing conventions. This one is probably the most cut and dry thing that you'll be grading. CUPS is the acronym we'll use for looking for correct conventions. The C stands for capitals, the U stands for usage, the P stands for punctuation, and the S stands for spelling. So when you're looking for capitals, make sure that pronouns like specific people, specific places, days of the week, months, those are capitalized. Also make sure that the first letter of every sentence is capitalized. As far as usage goes, make sure that the grammar is correct. If you're talking about a number of things, plural, they should have an S at the end, or whatever plural ending that thing has. If they're using the word to, make sure it's the right to, TWO, TO, or TOO. And that goes for other homophones like there or by, so make sure that those things are correct as well. In punctuation, when you want the reader to pause in the reading, make sure there's a comma. Anytime you have a contraction or you have a word that's showing ownership, like Miss Shepherd's or Dessa's or Tyler's, make sure that you have an apostrophe. Make sure that you have periods and question marks at the end of questions and exclamation points at the end of exciting sentences or things that you really want to emphasize. And finally, spelling. Because our pieces are typed, hopefully the person you're peer reviewing has gone through and spell checked some of the things that are underlined in that zigzag red, but just go through and skim and make sure everything is spelled correctly as well. And finally, appropriate vocabulary and word choice. This is 5th grade, so we're trying to shy away from simple words. Rather than using something like liked, you could say they loved it, or they were inspired by this. Be very specific when you're using words and sentences. 2 easy ways to beef up your vocabulary is to go through your writing and replace weak verbs with stronger verbs, and replace weak adjectives with stronger adjectives. So rather than saying something, you're running, you might say you are briskly sprinting. Rather than saying something is green, you might say it is a deep forest green. So make sure that you strengthen your word choice because it really helps the reader visualize and understand what you're talking about.